All right, so today we're going to be basically making this guy. I have him partway done. So I have him started in Blender. I'm basically going to work from that. I'll bring it into 3D Code, continue doing some of the modeling, the base mesh modeling, then I'll do the texture painting in inside Blender. Sorry, not inside Blender, inside 3D Code. So let's just do that. So I'll start with this. And that's my character so far. So at this point, it's unwrapped, but I still am missing some details. So I want some legs, I want some spikes on the shell. So I'll create the rest of the details in 3D Coat and then finish the texture painting in there. So first thing I'll do with my object selected in Blender, I may or may not want to change the pivot point and the scale. So let me just do those things first. Because this is going to end up in Unreal, I'll go ahead and change the scale first of all to make sure that my units are meters, and my unit scale in Unreal is going to be centimeters, so I'll just go 0.01. I can see right here the actual dimensions of my character, so I'll just go ahead and change that so that it's the size that I want it to be. I want it to be maybe about a meter long. So I will press S, scale them up. Okay, so when he's about a meter in his longest dimension, in this case the y-axis, then I can basically leave him. I have to apply the scale, so right now the scale is reading like that. I also want to change the pivot point of my character, so I want it to be somewhat below. This character floats off the ground. So I'll just press tab, and then with everything selected, I'll translate him up. So he's hovering above. Maybe even a little bit more. And then I'll come out, and I'm going to press Control A to apply the rotation because it wasn't zeroed out, and Control A again to apply the scale. Okay, so now my character is about 1 meter long, about 85 centimeters wide, and 43 centimeters tall. The model is not perfect to the way I want it to be, but it's good enough that I can kind of get things going. And I'll probably make a few small changes here first before I bring this out of Blender. If I can visualize this inside my shell. Let's increase my selection here. Just gonna move that down a little bit. And I'll do this with soft selection actually. Make sure it's connected, soft selection, connected. And make sure my influence is a little bigger. And get these as well. Oops. Okay. All right. Okay, I kind of want to change the face here. I want to make it a little taller. If you look at my reference image, it's kind of flat. I think that should be okay. One thing I'm noticing too actually is the shell. I've kind of made the shell a little bit differently. So if I select this loop and this loop, And if I'm going to scale them, turn off my soft selection. I'm just going to scale them on the X and Y axis. And actually what I'll do, if I select the face and just select the linked faces, and if I have seams already set up, it'll only select within that seam. And now if I press Control plus, it'll just grow the selection. And I will scale this. S, Shift, Z. Scale that in somewhat. And you know what? I'll use soft selection. S, Shift, Z. I just want to get a bit of a better silhouette on the shell. I'll also scale this vertically a little bit. And I like that a little bit better. But now I'm having a problem with some geometry poking through, so I just have to clean that up. Just fairly simple. Select this loop. And let's move that down somewhat. And I'm just going to tidy this up. Okay, I'm going to control numpad minus. Oops, that didn't work. Let's move this up. There we go. I probably will never see it from that angle, but I just want to make sure that it is fully closed off. Same thing here. Okay, let's move that up. All right, perfect. All right, so now with this, I can bring this into 3D code. I'll actually probably just, do one last thing. I'll just select this, select linked, and move this upwards as well. All right, get that a little flatter. I like the silhouette a little bit more. You want to always preview it to kind of see what it's going to look like from inside the game. That head might be a little on the small side. So I'll change that too. Because I'm going to do select linked, I'm going to change momentarily to vertex mode. Select linked, and that way we'll just select everything. I'm just going to scale this up a little bit. Again, I might be deviating slightly from my design, but I just want to make sure that the character reads a little bit better. Okay, so I'm feeling better about the size of the head there, and I will just select this, and select this, and select this, and press Control plus to grow my selection a little bit, and with soft selection on, just lift that slightly. All right. Okay, so I feel a little bit better about the silhouette. I feel like the back end might be a little on the high side. Bear with me, guys. I know this is... Okay, so I will scale this along the X and Z. only. Make that a little smaller. Move it down some. Okay, again, I want it to read. I want you to be able to see it. I want to make sure I go to the angle that it will be seen from and make sure it still reads. Select these, grow the selection a little bit. And now we'll move this down. And what I'm going to do actually, I'm just going to use sculpt mode. So Blender does have a sculpt mode. So I'll just go into sculpt mode, choose my grab brush, make it bigger. I don't want it to affect this guy. So I'm going to select this. And I will temporarily, let's see if I can hide it. Let's just hide it. Go to sculpt mode, and now hopefully I can just move this by itself. Smooth it a little bit. Again, I'm really just focused on the silhouette here. I just want to have a nice kind of appealing shape. All right, and I'll press Alt-H to bring that back. And that looks good. Go to edit mode again. Just clean up a little bit. So grab this and this. Raise that up slightly. All right. Okay, perfect. So look at it, preview it, and just make sure that it's going to look pretty good. I'll get the feet in there in 3D Coat. We may or may not even notice that, but I'll put it in regardless. And I will export this. So everything's looking good, just making sure everything's applied. I believe everything is UV unwrapped. Yep. Yep, so I'm good. I don't know what this is. Oh, it's the cylinder part. Okay, so with this, I'm going to go File, Export. I'll export a FBX. Bug FBX is fine. Make sure I have selected objects only checked off, and go ahead and export. Okay, then we'll open up 3D Coat. I'll just save my scene in Blender here. File, save. And then in 3D Coat, I will import my model, paint UV mapped mesh. I'm going to navigate to where I saved that character. So 3D, characters, enemies, floating bug, bug.fbx. And hopefully I didn't crash. And it looks like I crashed. So make sure I open the most recent version here. So let me get, whoops, yeah, 4.8.05. And paint UV mapped mesh, select my mesh, bug.fbx, open, and something's going on here. Let me try exporting as an OBJ. File, export, OBJ, bug.obj, export. Strange. All right, so let me get my UV mapped mesh. Just like that. I'll get the OBJ, and hopefully I don't have any problems. For whatever reason, it's working now. 2448 by 2048 should be good. No subdivision, keep the original UVs, no smoothing. My normal map software preset, this is important. I want that to be Unreal Engine, so it's already there, it's good. I'll just go ahead and click OK. So there's my geo, it's in the scene, and I can basically start texture painting it now. So generally when I'm starting, I'll probably lay down like some kind of base material. What I'm also going to do, because I'm going to do a little bit of modeling as well, I'm just going to open up my let's bring it in as a background image reference for, I believe it's Z. 2D roughs, and I want my robot ideas and this guy, robot flyer. So basically I can bring this in. I don't really need to use it as ortho or anything. I just want to have it there so I can refer to it from time to time. And I'll go ahead and close this. So that's just there. Just going to rotate this around. All right, so the other thing that I might want to do is, there's another way I could potentially do that. I could press B, bring up my color palette, and if I click on here, Windows, pop-ups, color palette, and that's not working either. Okay, so if I go here to image, I can basically pull in an image and work from that. But if I'm having a problem with my color palette here, if I can't color select, then that's a problem. I actually have to change this. I noticed that this was a problem in this version of 3D Coat when I first loaded it, but then when I tried it again, it wasn't giving me that problem, but now it is. So I'm actually going to go back to an earlier version and see if it works that way. So I will file, just save this. I'll save this in my folder, art, 3D, characters, enemies, floating bug. I'll call this floating bug. All right, I'm going to close this now. This is 4.8.04. So this one should be working in terms of the color picker. So I'm just going to open, file, open, recent, floating bug. And now if I press B, I should have my color picker and I can basically just choose a color. Or like I was trying to say before, I can select my image and then have my image basically pop up here and navigate to the to the image that I actually want. So I would select the image, in this case, this one. So this is another way I'll often work, and I'll just have that open. But because I want to be able to select colors, I don't want to have the image taking this up. I'll usually use this when I'm sculpting. So I'll go with my triangle, make it just a little bit smaller. Okay, so first thing I'll do is I'll generally just start with like some kind of base material. So I want this to like look turtle-like, but also be kind of mechanical at the same time. So in general, I like when things are more not metallic looking, but more so painted metal. So I don't mind if there's some metal poking through, but in general, I'd like for it to look more like it's been painted. So if I choose a nice kind of a base material to start from, I'll go in from here from default into metals. And this one's pretty cool. Metal painted dark. I like that. So I'll just go with this. I'll select that as my smart material. You'll notice it's going to automatically calculate curvature, just so that it can detect where the edges are. And it's going to ask me if I want ambient occlusion because it needs that as well. I can change the amount of lights. I'll just set that super high. You can also calculate your occlusion somewhere else and then bring it in. And then I have this smart material preview here, which I'll make use of in a moment. So with this, I can basically preview what the material is going to look like once it's applied to my model. Something like that is pretty good as a starting point. I can apply paint on it afterwards to further the effect. I can change the scale of this if I want it more dense or sparser with this magnifying glass. And by default, it's going to give me cube mapping, which is the same as triplanar projection. And so that's looking pretty good. And then I'll go ahead, for the purposes of this, if I want to work a little bit less, or a little bit more non-destructively, I can basically right-click on this, and I can attach this material to the current layer. And then basically, it's not painting it on, but it's basically now almost like a mask. So when I unmask it, it will reveal this material on the layer. So I can call this base material. So now when I paint, and I want some normal contribution as well, I had my normal turned off, and I'm going to set the mode to max as opposed to blend. So max. Oops. And what? It's not working. Okay. Interesting. Only blend is working. Anyways, it's not a huge issue, but not ideal. So I can get a preview of what this is going to look like. Again, so you can see now with the normal contribution, some stuff's getting a little bit raised. So I'm actually going to go in with my paint bucket tool here. I can basically just click on an object and it'll just fill that particular mesh with this material. And let's go ahead and do all of this. So I'll leave the eyebrows separate, and maybe I'll make this part something different as well. But I'll use this for the head and the shell as a base. And I'll just name this appropriately. Body base. So I want to do something similar where I do the teeth. So I want to determine what the teeth are going to be made out of. So I'll set this to default. I could probably just go with this regular material. And what it's going to do when we see a smart material that's set up like this, where it's got the different colors on it, that basically means it's going to pull in the color from my my current color. So I can also just press B to bring up my color palette and choose the color that I want it to be. In this case, I want his teeth to be kind of a yellowish maybe, or off-white kind of color, something like that. Can close that, and I can basically, again, with my paint bucket tool, simply click on each tooth and it will fill with that color. I'll probably want to tweak this. So I actually will tweak this. So I'm going to go in here to my tweak room, which is the second panel over. And I'm basically just going to go into my move tool. Just going to tweak some of this so that I have a little bit more of a not so symmetrical looking position. Probably want to recalculate my ambient occlusion because you'll see that how it's affecting. So I want something that reads pretty nicely from fairly far, that definitely reads as teeth. Let's get this smaller as well. Play with the spacing a little bit. There you go. It's working better. Oops. All right. So I think that's working better. It's reading like teeth. If I want to play with this even more, I can probably go in and it's nice to get something that's maybe a little bit asymmetrical, especially in this case. You'll notice that my move tool is going to be based on the alpha of my brush. So if my alpha is a little bit more smoother fall off, I'm going to get a smoother fall off on that move. So if I want to get like kind of like a slightly asymmetrical kind of face going, I can kind of do that as well. Nothing crazy. And if I want to make any minor tweaks to the position of the geometry, I can also do that. I want it to be a little on the wonky side, nothing too crazy. But I'm just playing with this a little bit. All right. Cool. All right, so I'm happy with that. I probably want to get a nice lightness on this edge here. So let's go back and do some more painting. So back to my paint room. What I'm going to do, I'm going to rebake my ambient occlusion. So I'm just going to delete this. And I'm going to go to calculate occlusion. I'll just go OK again. This time it's actually going to, it might, it actually, I shouldn't say it might, it's going to calculate the occlusion based also on the any normal contribution from this. So I should turn that off first. Let's see what that gave us. So it's kind of taking a little bit of that in. So let me turn this off first of all, and then let me rebake my ambient occlusion. So textures, calculate occlusion, okay. And you'll notice there's a little checkbox in there. I could do this per object rather than my entire mesh, which in some cases you'd rather do that, but in this case I'd want to just do it based on the entire mesh. All right, so now I have a good ambient occlusion. And now with this, if I bring this back, one of the nice things about when I've attached my smart material to the layer, I can right click in it and I can so what I do, I click on this layer. It should bring me back to that material. Metals. And then I should be able to refill material. So basically it's going to look at my ambient occlusion and basically recalculate the layer based on the new ambient occlusion so that I'm not having some of those problems. All right. So that's looking good. Whoops. Attach the current layer. All right. And then, so on here, that's my teeth. And I'll do the eyebrows. So the eyebrows will be similar material. So I'll do this face details. I'll call this base. And let's go to my default. Select this again. This time I want to choose a darker color, pretty much black. And I'm going to fill in the eyebrows. Oops. Make the roughness 100%. So now I have those eyebrows going as well. So I have a kind of like angry face. So that's good. I'll get the bottom of the body. I forgot to actually do the bottom of the body, so let me go back to this. And I'll just fill that in. All right, so now my whole body is using the same material, and I'll just do this one as well. All right, so now I have like a nice base to work from, and now I'm just gonna go in and start adding some extras. So above my face detail base, I'll just create a new layer. Actually, I'll position it underneath. So I'll select the, on the far right of my layer, I have the line with the arrow above and below, and I'll just drag it to the position I want, and I'll call this body paint over. And so now I'll just basically start painting onto my model. So I want to get a nice lighter color outside here and maybe a darker color in here, and then finally I'll put some like line detail and things like that. I don't really have a plan here in terms of what colors I'm going to work from, but I want to keep it kind of looking like a turtle, but maybe something like maybe more red in color, kind of like maybe a Mario style turtle. And I want the face to be a different color from the shell. So I will get to the face. I'll do the shell first because I have a good idea of what I want it to look like. And let us do, I want it to be paint. So I'm going to go to here. I'm going to go to paints. And I'll choose one of my paint materials. So I like this one. I like how kind of rough it is. So I can select that. I'll basically right click on it, and I'm just going to go to duplicate. I'm going to duplicate this, and I want to create a version that's going to draw my foreground color. So I'm going to click on this, duplicate. I'm going to save my file because this program unfortunately is a little buggy sometimes. I'm right click, and I'm going to go to the Smart Material Editor. And to make it pull for my foreground color, I'm going to click right here where it says color. And I'm seeing I have two layers here. So both are set to replace. I want them to be modulated. And I can actually have one be replace and one be modulate. So now the underlying layer is replacing the color with white, and then the top layer is modulating the color with this grayish value. But in my case, I want them both to be modulate. And I kind of like how this is a little darker, so I'll set my base color to be a little bit grayer. So on the edges, it will be kind of darker. And then I'll set this color to be a little bit, a little bit lighter. So let's make this one a little darker. So on the edges, it will be dark. And then on the actual color, it will be a little bit lighter. So it'll look kind of faded. I can also modulate the texture some more here. Right in here. If I want, I can add noise, procedural noise, and then I can get that. Oops. But I don't want the influence to be so high, so I want to change the value range here. Oops. So it's got a little bit of noise, and I can change the scale here. Let's make it like 4 times. Oh, sorry, not 4 times. Let me do 0.25. I want it to be smaller. Something like that. Let's make it more subtle. There we go. And done. Okay. So now when I use this material, and I'll give it a name. So paint colored. And save that. Okay, so now when I use that material, it should paint onto my mesh with my foreground color. So if that's like this, I would get a preview. It would look something like that. So I can either just paint on it with my brush. There's a lot of different ways I can paint on it, which is kind of nice. And unfortunately, I'm running into a bug that I encountered last time where it's not taking my foreground color properly, which is really unfortunate. But I'll work with this. We'll start with that. And I'll do the same on the bottom. I can check here, use color albedo. So basically it's going to look for anything that's similar in color. I can change the tolerance to be higher or lower. So if I have a fairly low tolerance, it shouldn't pull in as much. Like kind of like that. And let's hide my ambient occlusion. Set that lower. There we go. But I want different colors. I don't want everything to be white. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to turn off my normal and my specular. And I'm just going to paint with a color. So I'm going to remove my smart material for a moment. And I can go on a new layer. I can set the blend mode to maybe multiply. And I'll go with this yellowish color. What I can also do is I can make sure that it's only using the alpha of this color. So if I click on the little downward arrow to the left of this thing, I can get my layer options. So I can choose a clipping mask. So I want to use body paint over as the mask. So now when I paint, it will only paint on that layer. Oh, sorry, I'm using the wrong tool here. So I want to use my paintbrush. So I just wanted to paint, and it's only going to paint on that particular layer. Change the alpha of my brush, something harder. So I like this brush. So you'll notice over here I have these different brushes. I have the normal brush. I have the so the normal brush is going to go from thin to thick depending on how hard I press. The next one is going to go from transparent to opaque depending on how hard I press. These are variations of that. I have a constant brush, so it's always going to be the same no matter how hard I press. I have dots, so it'll just paint dots. I have a straight line brush. So if I want to paint like lines on my mesh, it's good for that. I have stamp brushes. So if I want to kind of stamp something onto my mesh, I can do that. I have marquee brushes. So if I want to kind of paint shapes like that, I can do it. But I just for now want to work with this regular brush. And paint on this. Some things that I'll do, I might go into press 2, and then I can just see just the flat color with no light information, and paint it that way. If I press V, it'll sample underneath my canvas. And I can basically paint with the color that I pick up. I have this set to multiply, so it's actually going to multiply this. Let me set this to standard blend for now. And already I'm starting to kind of get some ideas, so I can suggest like some shell transition. So maybe some kind of border. So I'm not being too like precise with this. I'm just kind of going in and painting. I'm going to press 5 to go back into my regular shaded view. Okay, I'll press B to bring up my thing, my palette, and then I can kind of go in and go a little bit darker. And this is where I might start going in and actually describing what the shell would look like. So with a darker color, I might just kind of draw in. What I can also do, I can turn on symmetry so that I'm basically able to draw on one side and get the same thing on the other side. And it might be not working properly because I don't have a totally symmetrical model anymore. If you remember, I kind of tweaked it, so I might have to actually go in and draw all this manually, which is fine. It's not a big. It's actually usually better if I do it that way. So I'll just turn off symmetry for now, which is nice. I can kind of get like more kind of variation or customization. That way. And I'm a little bit loose and rough, and you'll notice the brush I'm using is, again, it's modulated with my pressure. So and some stuff like this, I'll just go with it. Like if it's a mistake, I'll just run with it, improvise a little bit, and kind of build it into my design. Maybe it got damaged here, tell a little bit of a story, and kind of just go with that. Okay, so again, I'm using V a lot to basically paint right on top of my mesh, or to sample the color underneath my brush. I will press B to pull up my palette, and if I need a edge highlight, I can kind of just get it in that way, kind of paint in, so you can see that it's suggesting a little bit of form there. To get this to really work good, I'd have to turn off my roughness, or turn my roughness really high. Not necessarily on this edge highlight, but on the cavities, I would want it to be a little bit more rough, diffuse looking, so that it didn't break the illusion. So I would turn this back on, and then I would set my roughness to 100%. I could select this here. The problem is when I select this, it's going to recalculate my roughness. So I'll just go ahead and choose a dark color and just paint in the crack there. And you see how now, see the roughness is not contributing anymore. So it actually looks like this is possibly actual geometry. Maybe a little on the dark side. But that is basically what I do, I try to find certain areas here, like where I can maybe even go even darker and suggest maybe some kind of gap or something like that, and put that in. And if I can go all the way around here, for some of this, I probably want to paint on a brand new layer. This layer not having any kind of clipping mask. If you remember, this layer here is clipped to body paint over. So I won't only be able to paint on this paint. So I won't be able to paint on the metal underneath. But in this case, I also want to set my metalness to 0. Oops, I'm on the wrong layer. So if my metal is set to 0, you'll see that I can kind of paint out the metalness in these cracks as well. So now it's just a regular diffuse texture. Another cool thing that I can do if I'm doing this, I can basically go to E. I can go into my this tool. Make sure I have ignore back faces turned on, and then I can basically just do this kind of thing. It'll paint all the way through. So I can also change my tumbling style so that it's more free. And then I can kind of get the angle that I need. This is it. And then basically, I could just continue to paint it out like that. So that's basically what I would do. And at this point, since I'm still kind of exploring, I'm somewhat open to where it's going to end up. Ultimately, I want it to look pretty good if I take my time with it. And if I evaluate it at each stage, then chances are good that I can kind of push it in a good direction. It's always better, of course, if you have like a good solid reference to work from, but that's not always the case. So I have an idea. I did say I want the shell to be red, so I may change that at some point. I don't have to use this tool. I could use this tool instead, the polygonal lasso tool. Give me a little bit more control. The only problem with this is I get a little bit of aliasing, which I don't really like, so I'd have to always clean that up afterwards. I haven't found a way to get around that. And I don't mind if it's a little wonky. It's not like ultra precise. Kind of fits for this particular character. At least it kind of fits the style and the idea that I was going for. So this guy is a little bit more on the organic side. So this works with that, and even with like some of the modeling choices I made, where I made them a little bit more asymmetrical, it works for this particular character. Sometimes when we have paint through turned on, it causes problems because we paint through, and we don't necessarily want that. So I have some marks on my face that I have to clean up, but that's fairly easy. I can go into a side orthographic view. So if I press 5, I go into orthographic mode, and I can press keys on my numpad, and actually I don't mind that. It's kind of an interesting look, so maybe I'll just keep it. I'll just keep it. So I'll just paint some more though. Just paint in a little bit more of this. It's hard to see on the bottom. Okay, so I'm defining the lines here, but ultimately I'm going to have to go back in and just polish everything up. So I want to get some kind of form going here on the face, maybe something like that. And I don't know if this is totally black, but let me just choose an actual black color. Kind of really pull that home. And see, now I'm using a different brush. I'm using my thin to thick brush, but I'm still kind of not having the same line weight everywhere. I want to kind of modulate a little bit so that it's a little thicker in some spots and a little thinner in other spots. I look at that and I don't like it, so I have to change it. So I Control Z. I'll probably just go with something like this. Yeah, that's a little bit better. And that's okay, not great. I'm just going to sample this. Just going to pull in a little bit of a highlight here. Go back into regular perspective mode. Just a little bit of form there. What time we got? Okay, so we'll go for maybe about 10 more minutes and then we'll wrap. But we could potentially pick this back up next week. Any questions? Or no? Not really? If I wanted to like just pinpoint a certain area, I can press Shift Z, and it'll basically make that my pivot point. So I can basically kind of get in there and really detail it the way I want. Too heavy, so let me change my brush type here to this. Select here. Just kind of dial that back a little bit. I can go in here, select a darker color, paint little splotches or patches to kind of get little dents and dings. I don't know if the location of that, but I don't even know if I'll really see it, but I'll go with that for now. I don't like it. Erase it. So I can use my eraser too. If I don't want to change to my eraser brush, I can basically just go in and erase that. So I'm going to go in here and start cleaning some of this up. So I'm going to go a little wider just to suggest a bit of a bevel. Get some. And I can try to get some of these guys going a little bit better as well. And for me, I don't know, I found that like texturing is a somewhat at least in the way I'm approaching it right now, it's like not an exact science, and sometimes it looks kind of bad until it starts to look good. So I just have to stick with it and then kind of continue to work with it until it looks like something that I'm fairly happy with. Okay, so once I kind of have like a base kind of down, I will go in like afterwards and use some more smart materials just to kind of generate some grunge or kind of grime, something that I can kind of work off of. But I like to mix it up, so I have a mix of influence from my smart materials and also from like kind of hand painting. Okay, so go in here. So I'm just darkening around here so that I can make the edge highlight a little lighter. And I'll just lighten in here a little bit. Again, just to suggest a bit of a shadow. And then I'll probably go in finally with a nice light color. Pull out some of that highlight. And just kind of go back to just see if it's reading properly. And if it's not, I have to make an adjustment. I will go in here, get something dark. Kind of try to define that the paneling. Maybe paint in like a bit of a crack. And even these guys will have a little bit of a highlight. So I really have to be careful with the glossiness. If the glossiness is not right, then it won't read properly. One of the biggest things too I found is that just kind of the paneling is kind of like a really big part of it. If we have like good kind of panels set up, it kind of makes a really big difference. Maybe I have some rivets in certain spots. So again, I want to come out and see what that's reading like. Maybe it's too big. And I think at the edge here, I want this to really be seeming like it's overlapping the under part. And I'll take advantage of certain things, like if I want to maybe have some kind of like part looking like a patch. Something's been damaged, and I'll make this like another color. And even these rivets, I have to think about like what kind of shadow information would result from these, like a rivet or something like that, if these are kind of patched on. Let me just change this a little bit. So like, is it getting a little bit lighter? Is it kind of indented here? And some of this might be like too much, maybe a little too much hand painting. But I'll see how much I can get away with, and then potentially pull back. Select that. Oops. And I'll go in some places even really white, really bright. And then I have to make sure that in some places I go pretty dark, just to kind of suggest that, you know, these things are coming in contact. Oops. So I want to make sure that this looks like it has a certain amount of thickness to it. I want to make sure that that edge is certain sharpness as well here. And I don't know if that's reading that well, but do I have this on a separate layer? So I might play with this, maybe kind of bring it back into closer to the range of everything else, and then I can just focus on the fact that it's a panel. I don't want to draw too much attention to it. Okay. And then what I'll do sometimes too is bring stuff into Photoshop, where I can access my brushes from Photoshop as well. But that's basically it. I would need a ton more time on this just to get it working and reading better. But before I move on, I'll just go on a new layer. Just want to get a little bit more noise going, so I'll choose maybe some dirt. See what that looks like. Oh, that's kind of cool. So I'll fill the layer with this material. And I think my roughness overall is it's not working the greatest. So I probably would want to work on that some, and I probably would want to tighten up my paneling as well. Uh, let's go to new layer and turn these guys off. Oh, close that. Oops. So the reason it's coming out really dark here is I have some accidentally painted some dirt, which is having like a different a roughness parameter. But now, eventually, I'll just want to kind of get in and kind of paint some form. So kind of go fairly big with my brush and kind of suggest kind of like any kind of, oops, kind of like sub paneling or anything like that. Potentially crisp up some of these borders. Also put in my highlights. And any kind of like contribution from my from the actual any kind of contribution from the actual noise or any kind of textures that I've painted on. I just want to work with that. I want to incorporate that into my design. I like sub paneling, so if I have a panel, I like kind of like a smaller panel that's kind of a part of that. So I like to work out the big kind of shapes first, and then kind of go in after and kind of describe some of the smaller, more detailed parts. All right. So I don't want to stop, but I should stop. So yeah, I think we're gonna wrap up in a moment. I'll probably go for like a minute or two longer. Oh, 2 more minutes, and then I'll wrap. But once I get to this stage, then it's kind of like I can start doing some really interesting stuff. So I can say that this, for example, this panel is kind of broken up here. It goes like this. So with these little lines, I'm just kind of trying to clearly define that there's a plane shift happening. Uh, so there's a clear delineation between a side plane and a top plane. And if I can kind of like pull out these highlights, that's helpful. And one of the biggest things that's going to break the illusion is just the glossiness. So the less glossy it is, or the more strategically it's glossy in just certain places, the more successful this will look. But right now the glossiness is maybe a little too much on the shell. So that's another thing I'd ultimately end up changing. But yeah, that's basically it, guys. And ideally, I'll keep going with this and try to get it to a stage where it's where I'm happy with it. But it's really just kind of spending a little bit more time. But this, in terms of design language, these kind of oblique lines with like a 45-degree bend, that is that's something that I aesthetically I kind of like. Kind of offsetting things, getting a few parallels, but not too much. Kind of having these bigger forms and then kind of these smaller forms coming off of it. I could have like certain areas broken out, and that could be a oops. This could be like a kind of some sub panel or something like that. You could have like a little slightly darker area on the inside. And then I could have like some kind of emissive light in there as well. And this shape is not great. I probably would want to have a shape that's a little bit more less shape that is less, what's the word I'm looking for? Even. I want something that's like more kind of just same thing, kind of like more oblique, maybe a parallelogon as opposed to a regular rectangle. And then finally, again, I'm going into details here, but ideally I would work on it like on a big high level first, gonna get everything working as well as possible, have the details working from up close, but from far away, none of the small details are detracting too much from the overall design. And then if I find some spots where I can put like a nice emissive light, I would do that as well. So set this to emissive and get a nice kind of bright emissive color in certain spots as well. But that's basically it. This is fun, but we do have to go, and you guys are probably bored by now. So let's wrap here, and I'll potentially pick this back up next week or work some more on it before next week. Probably pick it up back again next week and try to bring it to a more finalized stage. Okay, cool guys. Stop there.